This week in Washington, the president has met with the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, among other meetings that the Israeli leader has had in Washington. This is happening against a backdrop of a very troubling pattern of activities on the part of the Obama administration. Activities that I think, broadly described, seemed aimed at weakening the state of Israel. Now, to be sure, this isn't, I think, meant to be personal. It's intended to create conditions under which Israel will make both territorial and other strategic concessions to the Palestinians that will thereby give rise to what the president endlessly refers to as the two-state solution. This reminds me of a warning that Winston Churchill famously issued back before World War II, actually on several occasions, but specifically in the context of a deliberate policy of his government at the time of weakening its main continental ally, France, in the belief that by doing so, even in the face of the Nazi buildup, that somehow peace on the continent would be preserved and thereby Britain's security maintained. Churchill said, I quote, "I can't imagine a more dangerous policy," unquote, than one of deliberately undermining a ally, a critically important ally at that, upon whom Britain was relying for its security in the face of the growing danger. Subsequently, both Britain and France did the same thing to the Czech government. The government of Czechoslovakia was at the time confronting growing demands from Adolf Hitler to cede the western part of the country to him. And at the demand of the British and French, Czechoslovakia did that, relinquishing not only formidable defenses in that area against the German military onslaught were it to come, but also enormous defense industrial capabilities, which were subsequently used by the Germans against both the British and the French, and for that matter, the Americans in World War II. In short, we have historical experience that weakening allies, especially in a dangerous world, is an ill-advised policy. Fortunately, another visionary, a student of history, an accomplished statesman, Jim Woolsey, who has served under presidents of both Republican and Democratic stripe, has come forward and said, you know, before you start pushing so hard for a two-state solution, there's a standard that the Palestinians ought to be expected to meet that would make such a solution actually conducive to peace, as opposed to simply a prelude, as we've seen before, of war. What Woolsey says is, look, there is the standard that has been established by how Israel now treats its own Arab citizens, a minority, about a fifth of the population. They're allowed to practice their own faith and have their churches or synagogues and mosques, what have you, in this case. They're allowed to have their own schools. They're allowed to have their own newspapers. They're allowed to be voters in real parliamentary elections for real parliamentary institutions and decisions. They're able to go to sleep at night secure in the knowledge that their government will not be knocking down the doors and killing them on a wanton and unprovoked basis. The same ought to apply to Jews living in any areas that the Palestinians might ultimately control, assuming for the moment that the Palestinians won't simply insist, as Hitler did, on Judenrein, is an important precondition to having a state that is worthy of our support and that will in fact be, at least prospectively, able to live side by side in peace with Israel. Jews should not only be allowed to live in the Palestinian areas, in fact, using the ratio of a fifth or so of the population, about twice the number of so-called settlers living in the West Bank should be able to reside there. They should have their own synagogues. They should have their own newspapers, schools, the opportunity to vote for elected officials representing them in a real parliament. In the case of the Israeli Arabs, they actually have a justice on the Supreme Court. They have a member of their Druze, an ethnically Arab community, in Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet. The same should apply for Jews living in any future Palestinian state. At the moment, this seems inconceivable because, as Jim Woolsey puts it, I think actually referring to Patrick Moynihan before him, there's a tendency to define deviancy down when it comes to non-Jews. There's an expectation that the Jews have to treat the Arabs one way, but the Arabs don't have to treat Jews the same way. This is folly, and it will, in fact, if it is allowed to persist, and if it is allowed to govern U.S. policy, it will translate into a Palestinian state brought about by a weakened Israel that will, in fact, give rise not to peace, but to the next regional and perhaps more far-reaching conflagration. We must learn the lessons of history. Weakening an ally, especially in pursuit of something that is not an end in itself. The two-state solution is supposed to be a solution in the sense that it brings about real peace, real stability. As the president likes to say, two nations living side by side in peace and security. That can't happen if the present kind of behavior, the deviant behavior, if you will, of the Palestinians towards the Jews is allowed to persist. And why I think it is so important for the United States not only to stop pressuring Israel to pursue such an ahistorical outcome, but for Israel to understand that it must not go there, and that it must, in fact, learn the lessons of history and look to its friends in the United States, and there are many, to help it, in fact, maintain its security until such time as we see real change in the nature of a comparable attitude towards Israel that the Jews have exhibited towards their Arab population within Israel. Until that happens, we're, I think, not going to be advised to pursue a two-state solution, let alone well served by one should it arise. Thanks for listening.